Many of you know Cathy Fyock is the chair of KYSHRM and VP for HANA Resource Group, an HR consulting firm in Lexington. You may know she's authored 5 books, is certified as an SPHR, and is a certified speaking professional, has held numerous volunteer roles within SHRM. But here's some things you may not know about Cathy. Cathy's 3rd grade teacher was Diane Sawyer's mother, and Cathy is still a fan. Cathy has a vanity license plate that reads Queen Bee. You figure out what the B stands for. Cathy is a lifetime Weight Watcher member and lost more than her current body weight over her adult life. Cathy is a card-carrying member of AARP. Her undergraduate degree is in vocal music, so you may have heard her sing a few tunes around the karaoke machine. Cathy was named the Louisville Connector by the Leadership Louisville and is passionate about the power of connection and becoming an everyday superhero. Her insight and experience will certainly give us the power to soar in our organization as we unleash the superhero within. And I understand the capes are optional today, is that right?
That's right.
Very good. Please join me in welcoming KYSHRM's hero, Cathy Fyock.
Well, has it been a wonderful conference so far? I'm looking out at some of you though, and some of you I think howled at the moon maybe a little too late last night. Or maybe it's just that you cannot fit one more piece of information in your head right now. Maybe that's where you are. So what I'd like to do is to start off this session by having you look around first, just around those who are around, sitting close to you, and look for the most miserable person that's sitting around. And what I want you to do is you need to give them a compliment. Now, even if it's just your name tag looks good with your outfit, or whatever. So if you find someone who needs a nice little word of comfort, appreciation, find them and say something nice to them right now. Please do that now. What you have just done is increased your social capital, and we're going to be talking about in this session. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my friend Mary. Now, Mary was an employee, a 4-year employee with Disconnect Tech. She worked as an administrative assistant in the sales department. And Mary was feeling a little undervalued, a little underappreciated. So she found another job and she gave notice. Now everybody was sad at Disconnect Tech to see Mary go. They were her friends. They loved Mary. They loved working with her. But they knew that life would go on without Mary. They gave her a going away party, but they knew that life would go on. However, once Mary left, things started happening at Disconnect Tech. The first thing that happened was that there was a huge blow up between the marketing and the sales group. There was screaming, there was yelling, there was fighting, and finally there was no talking. The next thing that happened was that a major proposal deadline was dropped, and the proposal didn't go out on time. And the third thing that happened was that Disconnect Tech lost their biggest client. Now, what did these 3 events have in common? The missing piece was Mary. Mary had power. Now, not the kind of power that you normally think of in organizations. She wasn't the boss. Nobody reported to Mary. She couldn't tell anybody, do it because I said so. She didn't have intellectual capital in that she didn't have company secrets. She didn't have any special technical knowledge. What Mary had was a third type of power, and that's the power inherent in relationships. Basically, Mary had some strong relationships at Disconnect Tech that the organization had never really valued or appreciated. First of all, she had a best friend in the engineering department. They went to lunch regularly, and they made sure that no proposal deadline was ever missed. She also, Mary's kids, carpooled with the kids from the marketing department, and she knew their families. She knew things about their families and what was going on, and she really made those departments get along the way that they did. She was also a childhood friend of the CEO of Disconnect Tech's biggest client. In fact, Mary had gone to the hospital to visit the CEO's mom before she passed. So, at any rate, Mary had some powerful, trusted connections. Mary had social capital. So, what is social capital, and who are connectors? Well, I like what Malcolm Gladwell said. Malcolm Gladwell, you may know, is the author of Tipping Points and several other great business books. And he describes connectors as having pockets of trust. He says they're far more important than we would have imagined. The people who know everyone in some oblique way may actually run the world. In a very down-to-earth, day-to-day way, they make the world work. Dr. Karen Stevenson has been a pioneer in the study of these connectors inside of organizations and understanding what are the relationships in people and how do they work together. She's written about the quantum theory of trust, and it's interesting because she started her career in quantum chemistry and then moved into anthropology. And how she made this shift is very interesting. She was working in a lab, and she had all the chemists working below her on the floor below, and she had one of those labs that she could look over into the floor below. And she saw individuals moving and working, and she thought that the way they were moving and working reminded her a lot of the molecules that she had studied in quantum chemistry. And she wondered if the same kinds of formulas and mathematical algorithms might apply to those individuals as it did to chemistry. So she shifted her focus to anthropology and started studying that. In fact, now I thought it was fun. I've been able to introduce Dr. Karen Stevenson, and I thought it would be really fun to say, what do you get when you cross a quantum chemist and an anthropologist? So I was asking some of my friends about, well, what would be a fun way to do that, and what could I say? And one of my great friends said, well, you might want to just Google it and see what comes up. So I Googled quantum chemist and anthropologist, and I got Dr. Karen Stevenson. So she really has studied these connectors, and what she's finding is that when you identify these connectors, they are extremely powerful individuals inside of organizations. The Marys of the world are extremely powerful. They're the glue that holds organizations together. They have the trust relationships that makes things work. And these folks are so incredibly important. In fact, she has found that by identifying 5% of these key connectors and putting them behind change initiatives, you will experience cultural shift as opposed to cultural drift, as in we drifting back to the ways that we used to do things. So we're also finding that these connectors are often folks that are underneath the radar. These are not the folks that you might think of as being the glue, the trusted connectors. In fact, these folks are often under the radar and not really seen as the big heroes, but kind of the everyday heroes that get things done. And this is, in fact, the terminology that many of the Community Connector projects have used to launch these Community Connector projects in Louisville and in the Bluegrass area in Lexington. Everyday heroes. So my question to you today is, wouldn't you like to be an everyday hero? Wouldn't you like to have more social capital, be able to have more influence in your work and in your life? Wouldn't you like to have more of the trusted connections to help you get stuff done and make things work and realize your goals and the goals of that of your organization? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring in this session, is how we become more connected. Now, let me first start by saying this is not about networking, so you can all breathe a sigh of relief, because I know some of you are saying, I hope this isn't another session on networking, because some of you are very uncomfortable about that whole word networking. This is not about how many business cards you collect. This is not about how many business lunches you schedule. It's not about how many connections you have on LinkedIn or on Facebook. This is really about developing trusted relationships and how we form those trusted relationships to become more powerful individuals in our work and in our life. And I'm going to be exploring with you 3 key ideas for ways that you can become more connected and more of that everyday superhero in your work. The first idea that I'd like to explore is to acknowledge the value of community. I think that many of us know we live in a culture that has been focused on the rugged individual, but increasingly we are learning that it does take a village. It's interesting, the work of David Rock. Many of you may be familiar with his book, an excellent book, Your Brain at Work, one of my favorites. And he says in this book that Maslow was wrong. Now, we know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we know that those basic needs need to be met before the social needs can be met. But what David Rock says is, no, that's not really so. Because as we study the brain and how the brain works, we understand that social needs are every bit as important to us as those basic survival needs. So we are hardwired to be in relationship with one another. And they are extremely important to us to have those key connections and to have those kinds of relationships going on in our life. And to explain this to you, or explain how I came to know about this really, was several years ago I had my own business, and I loved having my own business. When I left corporate America, I left Kentucky Fried Chicken in a corporate HR role to start my own consulting practice. And actually, I have to tell you, I loved it. It was so much fun being the queen of my kingdom. Because, you know, and you know how this is. To get something done, oftentimes we have to go through level and level of approval, and approval, and approval. And by the time we get something approved, it often doesn't even look like our original idea. So what I loved about having my own business was that I had an idea, and I would say, gee, I think that's a good idea. I will approve that. And I did it. And it was great, great fun. But over time, I started realizing that I was paying a price for being queen of my kingdom. And it's interesting that I came to realize this while serving on a SHRM project. I was working on this project, and I realized that I was going to these team meetings, and we were meeting about once a week for this big project. And I realized, oh my gosh, this was so much fun having team members and colleagues, and we had shared goals, and we were able to celebrate it together when we were able to achieve what we wanted to achieve. And I realized that was what was missing in my practice. In my own company, sure, I got to make all the decisions, I got to do it all the way I wanted to do, but I was paying an enormous price for being the queen of my kingdom. And the price tag was loneliness. And I discovered that that was just too big of a price to pay. So I decided that I needed to be in relationship. Now, let me ask you this. Is being in relationship ever easy? Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. It is not. Ask anybody who has been married for more than just a few years. Now, I have been married over 35 years now. And you just ask my husband, and if you ask him, how long have you been married? He will say, over 30 years, and 3 of them have been good. Which is better than when we were married 20 years, and he said, yeah, we've been married 20 years, and 2 of them have been really good. So it is hard to be in relationship. It's hard to be a part of a team, because what? We gotta take into account others' perspectives, others' opinions, others' input. And that can just be a real pain in the rear end. But it is that richness of relationship that we miss out on when we're not in relationship. So that's the first key idea, is being in relationship and understanding the value of that. So I have to ask you here, do you understand the value of being in relationship? For example, do you realize the value of what it is to come to Kentucky SHRM? I hope you do, because I hope you understand that this is where you can hang out with your friends who get it. The friends who have been there, who understand what it's all about, being an HR professional. And there is some real comfort in knowing that we have friends here who get it at a very core level, who we are and what we do and what we're about. So I hope you've been enjoying that sense of community that we share when we come to our Kentucky SHRM conference. So that's the first key idea, is understanding how important it is to be in relationship, to be in community. The second key idea that I want to share with you is learning how to be in community. Now, being in community means that we have to offer a point of connection. We have to connect with others, so we have to let others know how to connect with us. And I don't know how many of you were really paying attention to my great introduction, but I included some things in there that I wanted you to know. For example, I like to include things about the fact that I'm a lifetime Weight Watcher member. And I like to include in there that I'm a music major. Now, why is that? What I have learned when I'm introduced, and you mentioned those things in my introduction, is at the end of the program, people will come up. They may or may not remember anything of what I've said, but they will say, oh my gosh, you lost how much weight? And how did you do that? And what's the secret to that? There's a connection there, because I've offered that in that introduction. And people will come up and say, you're an HR person and a music major too, well, I was a music major and I played the trumpet, or that, we talk about that background. It offers a point of connection. So my question to you is, are you offering a point of connection? Are you making it easy for people to connect with you on something other than just what you're working on? What I'd like to do right now is give you an opportunity to quickly connect with someone sitting close to you. And what I'd like you to think about is something that you might be willing to share about yourself. It can be pictures of your kids or grandkids you have handy on your phone, and I know some of you do because I've seen them already at this conference. It may be just some interesting fact, something that you're going through, a trip that you're going to be planning, a trip that you've just come back from, something about you and your life that you might just share quickly with someone sitting next to you. So think about what that point of connection might be. Turn to the person sitting next to you or near you and share that one little point of connection. Go. This is always the trickiest part, the unconnecting part. So I bet you now, when you see that person, maybe it's even a year from now at the next Kentucky SHRM conference, and I hope you'll all be back, I'm thinking that you may remember that little tidbit of what you shared, because that point of connection offers us an opportunity to really get to know someone at a little deeper level. And I would encourage you to share that. That's really important. The other key idea that I'd like for you to think about is, again, something that David Rock talks about. And he says that we have to be very careful of status and how that plays into relationships. Because he says that if we are in elevated status, as we often are as a leader in our organization, that others can feel threatened by that difference in status. So what we have to do, especially to the extent that we're the leader, we need to do something to equalize that status. So what that means is we either have to sort of step down and back just a little bit, put our crown off to the side just a bit, or elevate the other person. So first of all, let's talk about stepping down ourselves just a little bit. It doesn't mean putting ourselves down necessarily, but it means being real, being transparent. To be able to say to folks, you know, I'm really smart, but I do make mistakes. It's being able to say, I'm real successful, but I've had some failures. It's being able to be real and to not have to be perfect and to share that with individuals. The other part of that is elevating the status of others, of greeting them, of meeting them, of offering an open hand to them. It also means understanding where people are, meeting people where they are. And it occurred to me when I left the corporate world, I joined my church choir. And I was stunned. I have to tell you, I was absolutely stunned when I started hearing prayer requests and realizing all the pain that was going on that we don't really talk about all the time in corporate America. We don't talk about the fact that our loved ones are dying necessarily. We're not sharing what we're going through with our children or with other loved ones or friends. And I was very, very struck by that. And I ended up writing a poem that I'd like to share with you here today. It's called I Am Your Employee. I am your employee. I am the only child of my sick and dying mother. She needs me to support her, to feed her, to nurse her. And I must be there for her. I am her only child. I am your employee. I am your employee. I am a musician at heart, a poet, a bohemian. I need to sing to the world. A voice inside me must find room to be heard, and I must obey. I am a musician. I am your employee. I am your employee. I have a best friend who's going through tough times. She's admitted that she's using drugs just a little at first. Now she's lost control and needs my strength, and I must be there for her. I am her best friend. I am your employee. I am your employee. I'm a parent of 2 young children growing up so fast. They have friends and activities and clubs and games. They need me to guide them, to direct them, to help them learn about life, and I must be there for them. I am their parent. I am your employee. I am your employee. I am a dreamer, a philosopher, an artist, a lover. I am a parent, a child, a friend, a spouse. I am a scholar, an expert, a craftsman, a professional, and I am a child of God, and I must obey, and I am your employee too. So I encourage you to think about those employees and those that are in your life, and to think about what are they experiencing, what are they going through, and is it possible to meet them where they are and to reach out to them. Learning how to be a part of a team is extremely important today. The third key idea that we need to explore is to understand how my mood and behaviors impact others. I like what Robert Fulghum says. He says, do you walk into a room and do you say, "Here I am"? Or do you walk into a room and do you say, "There you are"? Do you suck the life right out of a room? Or are you a breath of fresh air? Do you light up the room when you enter or when you leave? You know, your mood, your actions, your behaviors are contagious, absolutely contagious. And I'd like to do a little experiment right now. In fact, what I'd like for you to do is, first of all, put on the goofiest grin that you could possibly muster up, okay? Goofy grin. Okay, let's have it. Goofy grin. Now, turn to a neighbor. Turn around. Look at one another. Yeah, they are pretty goofy, aren't they? Yeah. But you know, a smile, laughter, it is so contagious, isn't it? Isn't it? And we sometimes forget that we have such power. When we go into a room, we can make things happen. We can make things happen just by the smile that we have, just by the grin that we put on our face. We can make a difference. We can change the dynamic of what is going on around us. We are extremely powerful individuals. It reminds me of that urban legend, and I've been thinking about that and preparing for this presentation. And you may have heard it. It's an urban legend about a Starbucks, and the person goes in and buys their Starbucks, and they buy the Starbucks, or they pay for the Starbucks for the person behind them in line, and to see if that's sort of paid forward or back in this case. And actually I did some research and I found out that this was actually true. And it happened in Washington, Maryville, Washington, on December 21st, 2007. She had been going into her local Starbucks, and she would go in and say each day, did they pay it forward? Did they pay it forward? And up until that day, maybe it had gone down one or two folks and it had been paid forward. However, on this date, December 21st, 2007, they said yes, it was paid forward 813 times. 813 times. One good deed created another good deed, created another good deed. Do you see what power we have? And it goes back to some old research. Eisen and Levin, back in 1972, did this experiment. And you may have read about it or studied about it in your textbook. And basically what happened was, now some of you will have to, I'll have to kind of set this up just a little bit because it involved a telephone booth. Now some of you may not even know what a telephone booth is. Before the days of our cell phones, we had to, we'd come to a conference like this and we'd be actually fighting for and in line for the telephone booth. But what the experimenters of this particular research project did, they would go into the telephone booth, and I guess I need to explain for those of you who've not used a telephone booth. You would put in the early days it was a dime, you would put in your dime and you would make your call, and then usually at the end of your call you would hang up, and then what did you always do? You'd check the coin return to see if you got your dime back. Well, what they did in this experiment was they put the dime back. They triggered it so that you would get your dime back. And then what the person would do, they would leave the phone booth and they would go out and they would stage someone dropping a bag right outside of the telephone booth. And the experiment was to see if the person who received a dime was more likely to help the person who had dropped their bag. And they found that yes, indeed, good things happening to one person create good things happening to the next person, create good things happening to the next person, create good things happening to the next person. So you see what power we have in just taking one positive action in our work, in our life. We can create a whole chain of positive events that are extremely powerful. And that is the power of connection, understanding the power that we have and understanding that we can be incredibly powerful connectors. So what I want to do is kind of bring this all together, and I want to kind of bring it all together in a fun way. So what I have done is placed around at your places, everybody should have a little connector card. And what I want to do with your connector card, if you'll pull your card out, and I want you to turn to the side that says, what's your CQ? And in this case, it's CQ, it's your connector quotient. And what I want you to do is quickly look down those list of 15 items and check. Yeah, that's me. I value community and relationships. I ask for help from my colleagues. So just quickly do that right now. Check those off, or just make a little mental tick mark beside each one of those, because we're going to add them up here in just a moment and see what your CQ is. Do you offer help to your colleagues? Do you understand others' values and perspectives? Do you acknowledge your own need for community? Okay. Look up at me when you're done. Count up your little check marks, your little tick marks. Okay, now here's the hard part for us in HR. This is the challenging part. We're going to multiply by 10, okay? I know some of you say math is not my thing, but I think you can do this. We can do this together. If you need to help your partner there, go ahead and help them. That's okay. So what I want to do is see what your CQ is here. So let's see. Do we have anybody with a genius CQ level? Do we have anybody at 150? Oh. Howard is 100. Wow. What can I say? Is there anybody else other than Howard? I was going to say some other. This is great. We got some. You could probably teach this thing. Okay, so next time you can teach this thing.
I will if you get them to move down front.
Okay, if we can move them down front. Okay. Now, how many folks do we have that are between maybe 120 and 140? Let's raise your hands. Okay, you're good. You're on the right track. You're on the right track. Now, I tell you what, I'm not even going to ask for the hands of those who are below a 90, okay? I'm just going to say, bless your hearts, okay? You need some help, okay? So we're going to give you a little help. We're going to give you a little help and a little homework to take home with you, okay? First of all, I think we can study about how to increase our CQ by looking at great leaders. And I think one of the great books where we can learn about what great leaders do is Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Love that book. And I love the fact he talks about these level 5 leaders and what they do differently. And he says, you know, these level 5 leaders, the ones that have led companies consistently through tough times, turbulent times, chaotic times, these are individuals who don't stand up and say, yeah, it's because of me. It's because I'm the leader. I'm great. No. Level 5 leaders will inevitably say, well, my company is great because I have a great team. That's what level 5 leaders say. So they are the ones who understand the value of being connected, of being a part of a team. So we can learn a lot from reading Jim Collins' Good to Great. We can also learn by studying other great leaders. And I would suggest to you, we have someone within the state of Kentucky we can look to as someone who has given us a great example of what it is to be a great connected leader. And that is Colonel Harlan Sanders. Now, I know some of you have heard some Colonel Sanders' story. Well, first of all, if I'm out of the state of Kentucky, I sometimes have to even explain that, you know, this was a real person. The colonel was a real person. We have to explain that. But he was, and in fact, when I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, the Colonel's office was, as you go into the White House, the big white corporate headquarters, his office was the first window on the left of the door, and my office was the first one to the right of the door. And when we studied customer service at Kentucky Fried Chicken, we didn't call it just customer service. We talked about kerneling. And kerneling was about doing it the way the Colonel did, because the Colonel was a master at connecting, at providing not just great service, but developing great relationships. That's how he built Kentucky Fried Chicken, was building these great relationships. So I started doing some research on the Colonel, and I found that there's a whole website now that is dedicated to talking about what he did and the legacy that he has left. And it's great stuff. And I'd just like to share a couple of the little quick snippets of individuals who have written about their connectedness with the Colonel. The first is from Maxine Duke, who wrote, "I was privileged to meet Colonel Sanders while working for a firm that owned about 75 KFC restaurants, and I had my picture taken with him at the time. He seemed eager to meet every employee, from the janitor to the president." Or Dr. Lisa Barclay wrote, "Sometime in the 1970s, I was on a flight from Atlanta to Lexington with the Colonel. I mentioned to him that I had 4 children, all of whom loved his chicken. He took 4 of his business cards from his pocket, asked me my children's names, and personally autographed them. He was a generous and concerned gentleman. It was a privilege to know him, even briefly." Or from C.R. Lincoln wrote this, "Traveling from Dallas to Memphis, we stopped at a motel overnight where a busload of inner-city kids from Oklahoma were also spending the night. Colonel Sanders was a guest, and I was in the desk area when he asked for paper and pen, and he wrote a note authorizing any KFC store to provide food for all the kids on their trip home. I was very impressed by this act of kindness and shook his hand and thanked him, knowing the busload of kids he had never met before would eat well on their trip home." The Colonel understood the value of community. He understood what it was like to be a team player. He understood how his actions impacted others. He was a real connector. He understood the value of that, and that's why he was so successful in his business. So we can learn from folks like that. And I would suggest that each of us can up our CQ just by performing what I'm going to call a random act of connection. And what I would encourage you to do is think about what is the one thing you can do to connect with others. And I would challenge you that in the next 4 hours, not next week or next month, but in the next 4 hours, I would challenge you, is there some act of connection that you can make with others in your life, in your world, maybe here in this room, that can help you raise your CQ? So I've given you a whole list of things that you might do, but here's what I'd like to encourage you to do. First of all, do it within 4 hours, whatever you're going to do. What I would also encourage you to do is send me an email, and my email is included on this card, because I would like to know not only what you did, but what impact it had. I'm going to be collecting those stories to share with all of those of you who'd like to learn about what happens when we start connecting with others. And I'll be creating that and sharing that. So please do send me what you have done to connect with others. So some ideas might be, maybe it's just you go home and you call your mother and you tell her how much you love her. Or maybe it's when you get home tonight, you tell your partner how much they mean to you and how much your success has depended upon him or her. Or maybe you have that friend that you haven't talked with in so long, and you're waiting for one or the other of you to kind of make up. Maybe it's time you reached out to that individual and build that bridge. Maybe you should go back to the office. Now, we can wait till Monday to do that, though. Monday, and you can tell your team at work how much you appreciate the fact that you can come to the conference and have such a good time. You don't want to stress how much fun you had, though. You want to stress how much you learned, but how much it meant to you to have things going well in your absence. The fact that you could count on them and they were there for you. Because you can make a difference. You can be a superhero. You are a superhero. You can be just like Mary. You can have such power, such influence. You can be a real connector. You can be someone who can make a difference in the lives of those you work with. You know, it's really an honor and a privilege for me to serve you, to work with you. You are my colleagues. You are my friends. I value you. And what I would encourage you to do is go out there and connect. Thank you.